So everybody, if you don't already know me, my name is Roberta MacIntyre. I'm the president and CEO of FireSafe Sonoma. And FireSafe Sonoma is currently working with the California FireSafe Council on a project that they're funding to work with 2 local communities in Sonoma County, one in Sonoma area, one in West County, to help them form their local FireSafe councils and to help them craft their first CWPP. So then I'm going to toss it over to you, Elizabeth. Elizabeth is from the California FireSafe Council. Go ahead, Elizabeth, if you want to help fill in.
Hi, everybody. As Roberta said, I'm Elizabeth LaMar, and I am a lead regional coordinator for the California FireSafe Council. We started working with Roberta, gosh, it's been over a year ago now, right?
November, I think.
November, okay. So almost a year working with Roberta on this pilot project of starting new FireSafe councils. And she's done an amazing job taking the lead on this and helping communities form a FireSafe council and then develop their CWPP. And a lot of the work that they've done, in fact, most of the work that they've done will go into our establishing a FireSafe council handbook that will be available in the next month or so.
Yeah, and this presentation is actually based on the draft handbook for the most part, yeah. And then David Duncan, he's with the Grove Street FireSafe Council. He's one of those 2 relatively recently formed FireSafe councils that I mentioned. David, you?
Yeah, as Roberta said, I'm Dave Duncan, and I'm president of Grove Street FireSafe Council. We started the process of getting our FireSafe Council going about a year and a half ago, but it was not until April of 2019. I guess it was about 2 years ago. But anyway, in April of 2019, Elizabeth called and said that our FireSafe Council application had been approved. So we started moving ahead, and we had our first meeting in July of 2019. Just a group of neighbors that I had selected based on their skill sets. All of them, most of them are retired except me. And I wanted people with a range of skills that I knew would be necessary and helpful in FireSafe Council. So we started having our meetings, and then the real action started when Roberta called in November of 2019 and said that FireSafe Sonoma was going to be able to help us get our Community Wildlife Protection or Wildfire Protection Plan done. And we were on a super accelerated schedule at the time. We were to get it done by May 31st. That is like unbelievably fast for getting a CWPP done. But then the COVID thing hit, and we have just completed all of the steps, have sent it out for review by all of the government agencies that need to do that. And so we are basically on the brink of having a CWPP, and we're moving into considerations such as projects that we want to begin. Yeah. So that's where we are.
All right, thanks, David. Okay. So the presentation, of course, is emerging FireSafe councils, in particular, creating a local FireSafe council. And I need to be here. Okay. We introduced ourselves already. We've got Elizabeth LaMar, David Duncan, and myself. All right. So when I hear that folks want to start a local FireSafe council, one of the first things I ask is, I ask them, why do you want to do that? You know, is it because you heard somebody else is doing it, or because you have a significant need and you have passion behind it, or what? So I think the first thing to think about when you're forming a local FireSafe council is the reason for doing that and the rationale behind it. And so if you've got good rationale, then by all means, get it going on. FireSafe councils are grassroots, community-led organizations. They mobilize communities to protect their homes and environments from wildfire. And they're really here to educate homeowners, and not just homeowners, but business owners too, about community wildfire preparedness activities. They integrate with local government officials, and ideally come up with projects that are specifically tailored to their local community, their geographical footprint, and then obtain funding to fulfill those projects. You know, they typically do things like hazardous fuel reduction projects, community wildfire protection planning, homeowner training, and education. So that's typically the three things that they do. In this presentation, you know, when you form an organization like that, there's a lot of steps, and depending on how robust an organization you build or how technically official you want to make it, the workload will vary. And in terms of this presentation, we can't teach you every little thing about everything. We can't teach you, you know, in just a little bit of chunk of time, how group dynamics work and how best to handle group settings, or how to facilitate a meeting, or, you know, how to fill out your tax form, whether you're using the easy, I think it's a 990, or the long form. But throughout this presentation, if you didn't get it already, in the PDF version of it, I have links to a lot of resources, most of which are WikiHow. And WikiHow, I found, is a great public source place of shared resources that are really worthwhile. So when you look at this presentation and the PDF version of it with the hot links, wherever you see something red and underlined, there's a link with really good information on how to do that thing. So I'm hoping that that'll be helpful for you as well. So let's see. You know, as I said earlier, what's the goal? Why do you want to start a fire safe council? The other part of that that's important, and David can attest to this, is you have to have community champions that are passionate about what you're trying to do, and who will have the longevity to stay with the group through the ups and downs, the hassles, you know, the good times and the bad times. So look for those people when you're looking for people to help you out. It's real important when you start your first meeting and all, you know, all your other meetings downstream from that, to appoint a facilitator. Have somebody who's good at, you know, moderating, you know, be the facilitator. Somebody that's good at taking notes. And that could be a shared duty. You could have one person taking the minutes and keeping notes while one person keeps everybody on task. It's important to have an agenda, and it's important to try to stick with that agenda. You want to develop a membership roster as quickly as you can. One of the very, very, very most important things to do right off the bat is start to collect people's address, phone number, and most importantly, these days, their email address. So you can grow that list, because that's how you're going to connect with people. That's how you're going to keep people aware of what's going on. That's how you're going to ask people to come to your meetings or ask them for help, etc. In your first meeting, it's a good idea to already have a sense for the footprint of where the organization probably will be, and share that with the group. Make sure you have it inclusive enough to surround all of the folks that need to be there. And, you know, whether that's a handout or a big map you put on the wall is up to you. The big map to put on the wall will cost you between $60 and $80 to have printed. Just be aware of that. That's experience as well. And then it's also a good idea to share wildland safety information at that first meeting. So Elizabeth, do you or David want to add anything to that so far? Any thoughts, particularly with, you know, soliciting input or soliciting folks to attend that first meeting?
I would just throw in that if you are the person who's going to get this thing going and be the motivator, think about the people you know in your community and what their skills are. What can they do? What did they do if they are retired? What did they do in their jobs? Because as we will talk in a moment, you are starting a company, and has the potential to be a fairly busy and involved company with a lot of things going on. We'll talk more about it, but if you're the one, start asking those people, would you be interested in joining this? And you've got to show enthusiasm, a lot of enthusiasm to recruit them. So that's what I would say at this very beginning stage to get people to come in.
Yeah, good. What about you, Elizabeth? Any thoughts with getting that first kickoff meeting going?
I think that it's never too early to think about your fire professional partners. Making sure that they are there, connecting with your local fire department, CAL FIRE, county fire, your sheriff department or police department. You're going to want them involved. And so it's never too soon to connect with them. Hey, we want to start this and we would love to have you at this meeting. This is what we're going to talk about. We would love your input on that. I know that when I've worked with communities that have done that from the start and folks come in and see their local firefighters there and law enforcement and other partners, they get that much more excited and they're that much more impressed. This isn't just a couple of people in the neighborhood trying to do a neighborhood group, but this is something serious. So.
Yeah, that's a good idea. With that said, I mean, a good way to, I think, maybe get those people to show up is to ask them to speak to the group. You know, if you're asking them just to come and sit and listen, that's one thing. But I think that, you know, if right off the bat you ask them for a commitment, it's like, hey, CAL FIRE, come and talk to us about some hazards we might, you know, want to be aware of in our group, or, you know, tell us about your wildland fire safety program or whatever. Just give them 15, 20 minutes to talk to the group. Then I think right off the bat you get some ownership from them. That's brilliant, guys.
Yeah, I think all that goes to what I would call cred. You need to get credibility both within your immediate group and in the community at large. Because as Elizabeth said, you don't want to come off as just a ragtag group of citizens trying to tell everybody else what to do. That you are actually going to make an improvement in the community. And to do that, you got to start working on that credibility with them.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
So you've got to go into it enthusiastically. You've got to be, you know, it can't be a, well, we're going to try to do this, but if we don't get enough people, you know, it's probably not going to happen. You really need to go in there ready to make it happen. And enthusiasm is contagious.
Yeah.
So when everybody's worried about fire, everybody has to worry about fire. I don't care where you live. Think Santa Rosa. You know, everyone has to worry about fire.
Yes, yeah. And that's why I use the word champion instead of leader or team lead or whatever, you know, because this person's more than that. It needs to be a champion. They need to be enthusiastic. They need to be passionate, or hopefully they are. I shouldn't say they need to be. Hopefully they're doing this because they already have those qualities. You know. Okay, so here's what I was talking about earlier. If you see where my I'm not sure if you guys can see my mouse. I'm guessing you are. If I scroll across this red heading here, you can see that there's a link to that. So there's a link to how to build a successful team here. And I just wanted to talk a little bit about some of the, I want to give you an overview about forming a group. There's like 5 steps that a group evolves through when they're forming. And I like to think of it as, you know, getting together and learning who the characters in the drama are. So you need to find out, you know, who's, you know, the extrovert, who's the introvert, who's, you know, going to be best at what, like David was talking about earlier. And, you know, and then, you know, the group goes through this step called forming. So you get together. And then the storming phase is really typically very chaotic, where everybody's still trying to figure out their role as part of the group, you know. And then the norming is when you kind of, as a group, establish, okay, Joe, you're the leader. Mary, you're going to help Joe. You're the co-leader, et cetera, et cetera. And then you get into the performing stage. Once you've gone through those first 3 steps, then you can really start to perform. If you don't evolve through those first 3 steps, groups can get stuck in those first three steps for a very long time. And it's really important to, for some of us, like myself, I can be very egotistical and not want to give things up. But, if there's somebody who's a better leader in the group than me, it's like, yeah, you need to be the lead. Maybe I can be co-lead. That's part of the norming part. You really need to establish, who's in charge of this, who's responsible for doing what, et cetera, et cetera. Once you get past that norming stage, then you can really, put pencil to paper and get the ideas going, brainstorming, and get into that performing stage. But I've seen so often groups of people get stuck in those forming, storming, norming phases and have a really hard time making a product down the road. Okay. So once again, you want to make sure you have a facilitator. When you're forming your group, I think it's important to establish a board of directors and executive board members, especially if you're forming an official group. You're going to want to develop a mission statement and stick with it. Our mission statement for Fire Safe Sonoma is, I don't know it by heart, unfortunately, I'm embarrassed to say, but it's basically, we're here to provide education and outreach materials with regard to wildland fire safety in the county of Sonoma as a whole. We also provide CWPP planning, and we also do project management as part of that fundamental goal. And remember, it's a business. So treat it like a business. Keep good records, et cetera, et cetera. And with that, you're going to want to craft a business plan, determine overall objectives, discuss projects, ideas, determine, when you discuss some of the projects and concepts and things you want to do, it's important not to set yourself up for failure. So make sure there are things you can actually do and try to set timelines for those and go, okay, we're going to do this by this date. We want to appoint a board of directors, within 2 weeks. We want to file for our certificate of organization by this date, et cetera, et cetera. And it's also important to assign responsibility for things. Even when I do a Community Wildfire Protection Plan, when I'm working with a group to do that, and David will attest to this, I don't want to be the person that's talking to everybody. So we appoint a team lead for that project. And for his area, David was the team lead for that CWPP. So I'm connecting and communicating with David, and he's working with his 5 or 6, team members, working on getting the task completed, instead of me dealing with everybody all the time. That's not feasible. And as David said, once again, think of individual skill sets. If you've got, somebody like David, he's an accountant and an attorney. You get somebody like that on your board or as part of your team, that's a huge asset. You don't want to give that guy the task of maybe going out and trying to do fundraising. No. Somebody else is probably better at that. Give somebody like David the task of, hey, would you mind keeping the books and, keeping us out of legal trouble and helping us form the legal corporation, et cetera. That's the things to be thinking about there. And we'll get into more detail about, how to treat the organization as a business and those steps here in a little bit. And I'm going to have David actually pretty much just take that whole section. So as Elizabeth was mentioning earlier, when recruiting members, learn, I have an F missing in my from. There are a couple of typos in this presentation. David pointed them out to me and I hadn't had a chance to correct them yet. So I apologize in advance for those if you see them. But yeah, make room for your community counterparts like local fire agencies, environmental groups. If you can get somebody from the industry on your team or as part of your board, that's huge. Think of representatives from your homeowners associations, You know, if you've got, like with Sonoma County, Fire Safe Sonoma is the countywide Fire Safe Council. So we may not be afforded to have one of our board members serve on your board, but if we can, you know, show up at some of your meetings if invited to talk about what we're doing or share with you how we can help you all, that, you know, that could be of value as well. So next, let me see if there's any questions from the group. Okay, not yet. Okay. Sustaining momentum is important, and I'm gonna, Elizabeth, do you want to talk a little about sustaining momentum? Because when we had the panel discussion earlier, I think you had a lot of good things to say about that. Can I ask you to speak a little bit about sustaining momentum?
Now you're asking me to remember what I said before.
Well, I know you don't have to remember because it's, you know, you just know it, but you know, you had some good ideas with some of the work you've done in your area with getting groups together and ideas for sustaining momentum. Do you want to share those or?
Right. So, I mean, I think that's the hardest part to me. It seems like it's the hardest part. Everyone's real excited at the beginning. They really want to, yes, we want to be involved in this. And so I know for my own community, we had, you know, meetings where 100 people would show up to the community meeting and we would gather information, and everyone was real excited and super ready to go. And we have a board of 7 people. Now we're a small town, so that's okay, but it can be discouraging. And so you don't, number one, don't be discouraged, because those 7 people are the ones who are really committed and they really want to work and make this happen. Those are 7 people on our board. They're team leaders, and they have their own teams who are involved in different things. So you are always looking to recruit new members. It's really important to make sure people know you exist. For me, that's kind of how you're going to sustain a lot of your momentum, is immediately start getting the word out there that you are here. This is why you're here, and this is why you're doing this, and it's to benefit everyone. And you can do that through developing a website pretty inexpensively. You can do social media. You can just word of mouth. Develop an email list from those first few meetings. You're going to sustain momentum if people know that you are still working towards a goal and that you still exist. A lot of times the Fire Safe Council will form, and there's a lot going on over here in this conference room, but people out here in your community aren't seeing it happen. So you want to make sure that even if it's, hey, we just want you to know we're still in the organizational steps and we're setting up our 501c3, but we haven't gone anywhere. Keeping the community informed is one way. I think that constantly bringing in new ideas and making sure that there's going to be some folks that, you know, you talk about asking each member to bring in an idea, which is great. There's going to be some that they're going to stay laser focused on that one idea, and they're not going to budge. And sometimes that idea isn't always something that you can tackle right away. So keeping that flow of conversation going, making sure that they understand that, you know, that's important. That's a huge chunk to bite off right now. So we're going to start smaller. Just a side note there. Communication is the biggest thing. Also partnering with other fire safe councils in your community or in your area, with your county fire safe council, with other local fire safe councils. We're developing some programs with the California Fire Safe Council where we're going to take these emerging fire safe councils and find a mentor. You know, so they have a fire safe council that can mentor them and help them to be stood up and ready to go and ready to tackle these things. Participating in community events is huge. And I just looked down and saw that as it was entering my brain. But again, it's making sure people know you're there. Talking to people is the biggest part of this, letting them know you exist.
Yeah, and I think that can be as robust and as technical or as, you know, Spartan and easy as you want to make it. I know in the community where I live at the grocery store, they have these community bulletin boards right near the front door to the grocery store. And, you know, the local fire safe council there, you walk by, if you look at the bulletin board, they'll have their monthly little thing up there saying, hey, it's the South Lake County Fire Safe Council. This is what we're doing, et cetera, which is really cool. And then these days, if you can get connected with somebody who knows how to use the technology, it's a fantastic tool. I actually took a class at our local community college on social media so I could learn how to use these tools. So the options exist. It's just up to you to take them as far as you want. But it's important to stay engaged with the community, like Elizabeth said. Make sure your board of supervisors knows you're there. Make sure your local fire department knows you're there, whether it's the fire district locally or even CAL FIRE. And Fire Safe Sonoma and Sonoma County, we can definitely help with that because we're kind of that liaison. We have a couple people on our board who are fire folks and who go to the monthly county fire chiefs meetings and the monthly fire prevention officers meetings. So that's an example of how we stay engaged with those folks. But yeah, it's very important to make sure you're out there. It's marketing. You have to market.
One thing we did right away was in one of our earliest meetings, I said, let's get a website. In this day and age, if you have a website, you exist. If you don't have a website, you maybe sort of exist. So that a couple of people on our board said, why are we spending our time on this now? We got other things to do. But it was because I wanted to get that community connection, have a place to refer people. And back when we could meet in person, I did a couple of presentations in front of our neighborhood association where I could, right up there on the screen, I could show, this is our website, and there was an audible ooh from the whole crowd. So people, and so one of the people you want to have on your team is someone who knows how to do that stuff. I don't, but we have one of our guys that I specifically recruited because A, is a volunteer firefighter, but B, he knows the technology. And so he has our website going. That's just a way to communicate quickly.
Yeah.
And social media is free. Social media is free. It costs you your time. And a website, you can start a website for pretty inexpensively, actually. And then remind me later to talk about some funding opportunities that are coming up for starting fire safe councils.
Yeah, I have a section on funding, so we will definitely talk about that. Yeah, and yeah, so Wix has free websites. I think GoDaddy has free websites. You just really, what is it, like about $10 a year for your domain name, and you're off to the races. But Elizabeth is correct. It does take time. And back to staying engaged with the community, I think it's real important not to let your website get stale either. I think there should be something fresh on there at least once a month. The more often, the better. And with Fire Safe Sonoma, we had a website that, went dormant, I'll say, for a long time, because, nobody was maintaining it. And only recently did we start to really dive back into it and jump all over it. So yeah, that's important. I have a question. I'm gonna go ahead and take questions as they come, since we have a small group. David, do you see the Q&A? It looks like this question's for you from Ray Willett.
Yeah.
Okay. Can you respond to that? I think
sure.
yeah,
absolutely. I'd love to help. And there are other people on our board who would be good references as well. I can ask them, but yes, I'd be happy to help out.
Perfect. So David can get in touch with you through the Grove Street Fire Safe Council website, right? Or you have an email, right?
Yeah. You can, if you look at Grove Street FSC.org, that's our website.
Yeah, so I'm going to type it in.
Okay. I will say, Raymond, I gotta say one thing. I'm still working and I have tax deadlines. So September 15th and October 15th are both pretty big deal deadlines. So I'll do what I can until those pass, but I'll have more time after I get past those deadlines. Sorry to throw that in, but that's the reality.
Hey, David, look in the Q&A and make sure I did that right. www.grovestreetfsc.org, is that right?
In the Q&A.
Yeah, I just sent it. Oh, I think it was, well, I don't know if you can still see it because I sent it. Oh, well, anyway.
I'm
So,
not.
well, it's grovestreetfsc.org, right?
Yes.
Yeah,
Grove
okay.
Street FSC.
Well, I feel like I got it right because I've written that so many times lately.
Yeah.
Okay, so so now let's jump into business practices, and I'll get this going, and then David will talk a lot more about it because he knows this stuff like the back of his hand. I just do want to kick it off with reminding you that if it's not managed well, things will go poorly. And there are legal, if not ethical, ramifications if you do things wrong. There's tax filing requirements that are different than your regular personal income tax. And I cannot stress enough the importance of keeping good records. So I'm going to go through the slides and, you know, consistent official information. Do you kind of just want to talk about this, David?
Yeah. I may not talk directly off the slides, but let me talk about the formation of the entity and what you'll need to do, the different stages. When you first get
David, let me jump in and talk a little bit about the importance of using consistent official information, and then I'll hand it off to you. And I wanted to talk about that because with FireSafe Sonoma, we had a very trying issue recently when we were trying to submit for FEMA grant funding for a grant. And what happened was FEMA's gone to a system where they're connected with the IRS and SAM.gov or whatever. They're connected with like 3 or 4 different entities, your DUNS or organization information. And a lot of that stuff through the evolution of FireSafe Sonoma was set up by different people before I even came on the scene. So when I went to go set up the portal to apply for this grant, we couldn't do it because all of this information was different in different places. So the IRS had a different set of information for FireSafe Sonoma than the DUNS did. And the system that FEMA uses to fund grants and manage grants had different information than everybody else. So we actually were appointed a handler to help us and our treasurer walk through all of those. And we actually had to sign a notarized letter giving them permission to access our accounts to fix everything and make it all correct. So what I'm trying to say there is, as you fill out information with different entities, the IRS, you know, the Secretary of State, everybody, use the same information always. One of the issues we had, some of the information said FireSafe Sonoma, some of it said FireSafe Sonoma Inc. That's not going to work. All has to be the same. So as you go through that process, make sure everything's the same. Okay, off my soapbox. David, it's yours.
No, well, in a way, the good news is, as an emerging fire safe council, as you're getting this thing going, you are a good long ways away from applying for FEMA grants, and those are a whole nother level of grant application. So the good news is you can start off with the entity and get it formed, and then stay with it all the way through. And by the time you get to the FEMA process, you'll be cooking with oil. So when you start out and you're just a group of people, if you really say you're going to be a fire safe council and you come up with a name, you are an unincorporated association. You're not a corporation, you're not a partnership, an LLC, you're just a group of people, the kind of what I called earlier, the ragtag group of citizens. And you can stay that way, and you should for a while. And how long? Well, you want to make sure you've got some traction and that this thing is really going to happen. In our case, as I said, we started having meetings in July of 2019. It wasn't until January of 2020 that we filed our articles of incorporation to be a corporation in California. So don't rush to incorporate, because I always say that incorporating is a fishhook phenomena. That is to say, it's easy to get into and tough to get out of. Anyone who's ever had a fishhook stuck in them will understand that. So once you feel that it's really going to happen, at that point, I do recommend incorporating because, well, for several reasons. One, you're starting to take actions that might give rise to liability. And if you've got the corporate entity there, you can help protect yourself from personal individual liability. You are going to want to have the corporation there if you apply for tax exempt status. We'll talk about that in a minute. But so that's the first thing is, do we incorporate and when? Assuming that you are going to incorporate, you'll need to have the three basic officers that are required under California law: president or chief executive officer, a treasurer, and a secretary. Those are your officers. The people who are, the other 9 of you who are on the board, are the board members. These select group of 3, and you can have more, are the officers. You can have as many vice presidents as you want. When we started out, I was originally thinking we would have like a vice president of public information, vice president of governmental affairs, and that sort of thing. But you don't have to get that complicated. But you do, if you incorporate, you're going to need those 3 people. So you want to start identifying who would be the president, who's going to be the treasurer, who's going to be the secretary. Once you get that going, then you can decide, do we want to apply for tax exempt status? You don't have to. To get grants, those have to go to a tax exempt entity. I mean, I've never, let's just say that you need a tax exempt entity to get grants. You can have a fiscal sponsor. These are tax exempt organizations, and I believe FireSafe Sonoma serves as a fiscal sponsor. Does the California Fire Safe Council, Elizabeth?
Not at this time, but we are be a little careful with conflict of interest. If it's funding that we are distributing, then we can't necessarily be a fiscal sponsor. So we're working on that.
That makes sense. In our case, since I am a volunteer firefighter, at one of the monthly meetings of the Sonoma Volunteer Firefighters Association, I said, can the association serve as a fiscal sponsor? And they said yes. The thing you have to remember, the fiscal sponsor takes on an enormous amount of liability and has to keep all the books and records for your entity. So it has to be an entity that's willing to take that on. But that's an option to getting your own tax exempt status. If you use the fiscal sponsor, you do your grant application, the application goes out, but the money comes in to the fiscal sponsor, and then it's paid out to you as you do your projects. And, you know, I'm talking about all this, we're kind of getting down the line here because, as I said, we've been working on this since July. We are just now getting our CWPP. We are just now getting to the point that we can start thinking about grants and doing projects. So you've got time to figure all this out. Let's see, in addition, there's the incorporation and the legal side of things. Then you also need to keep books and records. We use QuickBooks. There are specialized programs for tax exempt entities, but if anyone who you have in your group is familiar with bookkeeping and accounting, as I find, if you're good at that sort of thing, it's sort of like playing catcher or goalie. Everybody will let you play that position because nobody else wants to. But you're going to need somebody in the group, or you're going to have to bring in and perhaps pay a professional to do that. Just as I said, if you don't have somebody in your core group who has a legal background, you're going to have to bring somebody in to do that, or spend a lot of time with NOLO Press and other sources to get your incorporation and legal side done. From the accounting side, if you are going to have funds and a checking account, you'll need to keep books and records. And it's basically double entry accounting, but accounting for tax exempt entities is a niche. It's unlike the typical corporate and business accounting rules that you apply. So if you're going to find someone in the outside world, you're going to need to find someone who is familiar with nonprofit accounting. As far as taxes, if you form a corporation, you will need to file a Form 1120, I'm sorry, a 990 as a tax exempt organization. And on that you report your gross receipts, your expenses, your program expenses, and account for what you brought in. The big difference between nonprofit accounting and tax reporting versus profit-based companies, it's not the bottom line that counts. What the IRS and the Franchise Tax Board are looking at, and the Secretary of State, are you using your funds for your tax exempt purpose? That's the whole thing you need to report to them. So that's kind of a quick run through on the business side. As I say, you want to line up people or make arrangements to take care of these right at the beginning, so you can have those things in place as you grow.
Perfect. Thanks, David. Let's see. So, yeah, you covered all this. Articles of incorporation, bylaws. That's, I think, the first thing. Also, I want to mention you can get templates. I think the IRS actually has a boilerplate articles of incorporation you can download and use. Also, NOLO Press has a lot of good stuff if you go to their website. Go ahead, David.
Let me just interject that the articles of incorporation for a California nonprofit corporation are different from the articles that are filed for a profit base. They have to have certain provisions in them, and your bylaws have to have specialized provisions in them. So you want to make sure that you are using the correct forms. And yes, the California Secretary of State website does have boilerplate articles that you can use and fill those out. And as Roberta mentioned, we keep talking about NOLO Press. NOLO Press is a publishing company that specializes in legal type documents, and they have a very good book on, and you can get it electronically, on how to form a nonprofit. And they also have a book on nonprofit organization minutes, because you need to keep a corporate minute book to keep track of all this. So NOLO Press, I think there's a link at the end of the presentation for NOLO Press. So I can recommend that.
And they're in Occidental, so that's good too. So, okay. And also keep in mind, these are links on the PDF one. Wherever you see it's red, a text with the underline, those are links to more information. Okay. You know what? With insurance, David, you just went through this experience. So I'm going to have you talk about your experience, because the experience you had with getting insurance for your Fire Safe Council is different than what Fire Safe Sonoma's unique circumstances. So I'll have you talk about that if you don't mind.
Yeah, one of the important issues is even at the beginning stages, you're going to want to have directors and officers insurance. And I don't recall the name of the company, I can send it to you, but let me back up. This is an example of getting the right people on your team. We have a couple of people on our board who have professional experience in the insurance industry. One of those board members was absolutely insistent that we have comprehensive insurance coverage before we even walk out the door as a fire safe council. So he did all the research, got in touch with the broker, and we now have a directors and officers policy and a liability policy. I can throw this out there. Those two policies run about $2,800 a year. There are other coverages that we may consider as we grow, but we don't need them right now. The screen shows, in addition to workers' compensation, if you're going to have employees, you would need workers' comp because you're an employer like any other business. We don't need workers' comp until you have employees. Contractors, we have yet to get into that because we haven't engaged in any contracts to do project work yet. But when we do, we are going to make darn sure we are a named insured on the contractor's insurance coverage. If you've got a company that's doing tree cutting and arborist work, and all those things have extremely high liability exposures, we're going to make sure we're covered under that contractor's insurance coverage. So the basic policies that you need to look for are the, as it's called here, errors and omission and the liability.
Yeah, and then with workers' comp, with Fire Safe Sonoma, I'll share some of our recent experience there. With the changes in the laws, Federal Labor Standards Act or whatever, FLSA, and even the local state laws and regulations that have evolved out of the issues with for-hire Uber drivers and Lyft drivers, etc. It's really put the definition of a contractor in flux with regard to that relationship with your organization. So you need to be careful when you're contracting with folks, if they're a grant writer or whatever. I think it's important these days to really have a good, well-written contract that has the elements in there that will pacify the current regulation in terms of describing and clarifying that, yes, this person that's helping you do XYZ is a contractor and not an employee. You want to be able to withstand any kind of challenges that might come your way with regard to that. And it's really, in my opinion, a really messy, slippery slope right now, still in flux. Elizabeth, can you share any information you might have through the California Council with regard to dealing with contractors in the recent regulations?
You know, we haven't had that much of an issue with the recent with this recent legislation that's passed because most of the folks that we've worked with most of our fire state councils have an already standing relationship with their contractors. They are true contractors. They don't fall in that gray area. So I haven't heard of any issues at all. We haven't had any, but I would imagine that there could be some things coming down the road, and we have to, like you said, it's a slippery slope and we have to be careful. But for the most part, we haven't seen a huge issue yet.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, this has been an issue way back in the late 80s and 90s. I did some presentations to Oracle and some other of the large tech companies down there who had rooms full of people sitting in cubicles. And these 10 people over here were all paid as employees. These 10 over here were all masquerading as independent contractors. And the IRS got wind of this and went through those companies, and it was the happy hunting ground for the IRS. So back then, there still are various checklists depending on which agency you're talking about, but there are checklists that would help to support the argument that somebody is a contractor and not an employee. as Roberta alluded, there are some recent decisions. California, surprise, surprise, is making it much more difficult to characterize somebody as a contractor. So it's an issue. And as Roberta mentioned, if you've got somebody maybe helping design your website or somebody helping you with a grant application, and they're just working out of their home and they kind of do this a little bit and they have no other job other than working for you, you probably have an issue that that person could be characterized as a contractor. If you're contracting with a company to do tree cutting and they have their own corporation, they've got a company, they've got employees, that's clearly a contractual relationship. So it's something you need to think about, but I recommend that somebody in your organization become familiar with it so that you don't walk across that line.
Yeah, and then just with FireSafe Sonoma, with some of the experiences we're having recently with, consultants, et cetera, folks working with us, for us, I'm leaning towards trying to convince the board that we really should probably have a workers' compensation policy in place. So we don't have to really walk that fine line or be real careful about some of our contractual relationships. It would just feel better the way things are these days if we could just say, yeah, we have workers' comp. So, and our treasurer's actually working through all that now, trying to figure out the pros and cons, the benefits, et cetera. So we'll see where it goes.
The good news, again, is as you're starting this out, you've got time to think about it. I mean, if it's just your board group meeting periodically and trying to push things along and then work toward getting your CWPP, none of those board members are likely to be they're not going to be contractors because they're on the board. They're not getting paid. They're all volunteers. So you don't have these issues until you get more complex. So that's maybe the good news about all this.
Oh, and also I think, there's a modest stipend that you could pay your board members, if you're wanting to pay them for some of the work they're doing, as a board member, you can pay them a stipend without them being characterized as an employee. Is that correct, David? Do you know?
Yeah, it depends on the amount. There's a stipend. Nobody told me about the stipend. At first, I think everybody's going to be a volunteer. I don't know where the stipend money comes from. So if you have some money and you want to pay a stipend, I guess. But I think most of your core group at the start are going to be doing this because they want to help and as volunteers.
It doesn't become an issue to you're actually cutting somebody a check, honestly, and then you have to ask yourself, is this person a contractor or an employee? So it's just, be careful, just be careful there. And like David said, when you're getting started, the likelihood of that even being an issue is probably not even gonna surface.
I will say officers of a corporation, by definition, are employees. You cannot be the president and be an independent contractor. So as to those people, if they're getting paid, yeah, then they're going to have to get paid as employees with W-2 withholding and everything else. But again, I doubt that when you start, people don't usually, form fire safe councils for fun and profit.
Yeah, truly. Yeah. So, okay, I think we covered this, getting the work done. Well, let's dive into this a little bit. We kind of scratched the edges of this already. So board members, yeah, as David said, if they're getting paid more than a stipend for specific work, then they're probably an employee. Most of your work, like David mentioned, is likely to be through volunteers. When you're doing that work, I suggest that you keep track of that time. Have everybody, you know, if the only thing you're doing with your volunteers is you know, tracking their time, I think that's the minimum you should be doing, is what I'm trying to say, is at least keep track of your volunteer time, whether you have a formal volunteer application program, whatever. I think at the very minimum, you should track their time. And where this comes into play mostly is two ways. One is you'll get a sense for how long it takes to get things done. And if you're working on a grant, you're going to need to track those hours as in-kind hours against that grant, very likely. And depending on what grant you're working on, some grants have a set value that they set for your volunteer time hourly. I think the California rate is around $29 and change, according to the IRS, for volunteer hours. Some grants, I think the FEMA grant we applied for recently had an amount set at like $24 or $25 an hour. So you want to watch that and definitely get in the habit of tracking your volunteer hours. I know you guys do a stand-up job of that with the Grove Street Fire Safe Council out there, David.
Yeah, right at the beginning, being of my general nature, I immediately went to the federal book of guidelines for this. And for federal grants, there are, I think all federal grants, correct me if I'm wrong, but there is a one-to-one match. So if you've got a $200,000 project, you get a grant for 100, but you, the group, the organization, have to come up with the other 100. And that can be in cash or, as Roberta says, in kind. So to the extent that your group works on that project, those are in-kind hours and they're valued at a whopping $29 an hour. So that counts toward the in-kind amount. I've had, since our first meeting, I have asked all of our board members to keep track of their time. We have a spreadsheet that we do this on the Google Drive. And the idea being that at least we'll capture that time. It's dubious as to whether we can amortize that time and apply it to a future project. Probably not. But if we don't capture it, it's gone forever. And it can be a fun fact to know and tell. Oh, look how much time we're putting in, and look, here's the time it takes to do the risk assessment or the mapping part of the CWPP. Anyway, it's good to keep track of your time, and it makes time go by faster when you're watching every minute.
Elizabeth, you want to weigh in on that, I think, right?
Just that, yeah, you can't apply what you're doing now to a future project. It has to be from the time a subaward is signed. But what you're doing is great training, because we see a lot of organizations that, you know, okay, well, they've been working and they've got their fire safe council formed and all of this is done. They haven't been tracking those hours. They haven't been training themselves to track those hours. Now we've got a $100,000 grant and we have to match with $100,000 of cash or in kind. We're going to go for the in kind. And you've got the person who's collecting those hours. It's like pulling teeth because they've never done it before. And so if you've already got people in the practice of tracking those hours from day one, then it's not something new. It's not an extra added, you mean I have to do that too? They're already used to doing it. And it's easier, much easier in the long run.
Yeah, perfect, thanks. And then with regard to contract work, about the best advice I could give you there is to, well, actually, Elizabeth, you can help me with this maybe a little bit, but if you're using public funds, you, at least I think you should, if not you may be required to do competitive bidding on any kind of work, contract work you're having done. It's a good practice anyway, but regardless, the big thing I want to mention there is always have a written agreement with whoever you're contracting with. If you're having somebody, if you're paying a speaker to come to speak at a group, and you have a speaker's agreement with them, you know, that is your contract. You're paying them $200 to speak to your group. That's an agreement. That's a contract. So I would really be careful about doing any kind of fee for service without a written agreement. And Elizabeth, can you speak to the use of public funds and having to go out for competitive bid maybe?
So it varies by the granting agency. Federal, if it's $10,000 or below, you don't have to go out to bid. You don't have to go out to competitive bid. 10,001, you have to go out to competitive bid. You have to get at least 2 bids, if not 3. You're kind of smarter to get 3. There are exceptions. If there's, you know, a sole source, there's only one person in the entire state that does this job the way you need it done, or that does this job, period. There are exceptions and you can get around that. But then there's state grants that don't necessarily provide you with those guidelines. And so it's important in your policies and procedures that you have a procurement policy and that you lay that out, because they come back to you and say, we want you to follow your procurement policy. And so you want to make sure that that's already established. Sometimes it's just, even if you have that policy, but sometimes if it's the federal says it's $10,001 and on, some people just feel safer going out to bid anyway, and that's fine. It's not like they're telling you you can't, but you absolutely have to after $10,000.
Yeah, that's good to know. And then the other part of that too is like when you're putting your projects together and figuring out those costs, be careful about, you know, getting a bid from one person. You're going to want to get different bids so that, you know, do that homework on the front end, I guess is what I'm trying to say, rather than putting a number in a spreadsheet and applying for a grant, then getting funded, and then having to reverse engineer it and find a contractor that can do it for that amount, kind of sort of doing competitive bidding, because that's going to be a time suck at the very least, and it's really a haphazard way of doing it. So as you're building your budget for any kind of grant funding projects, it's important to do that on the front end, I think.
One of the things that I'm hoping to do is to talk to a number of vendors who do these services, let's say arborists, for example, and see if we can work out supply contracts, supply and demand contracts, where we enter, the contract says, we will use your arborist company and you will provide those services at a preset rate. And they know that we are going to come to them. Now, in something like this, you're going to want 3 or 4 agreements like that with arborists, because they get busy and they can't sit around waiting for you to have a project. But if arborist A is busy and can't start work when we need them to, we can go to arborist B and maybe they can. So the idea is to get all that laid out ahead of time so that when you're doing your budget for a project, you pretty much have some numbers that you can plug in easily without having to scramble, as Roberta said, and do it right before the project starts.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, I'm gonna jump forward here. So project management, speaking of projects, so oftentimes as an organization, if you apply for the grant, get the funding, you in essence become a project manager, or you're assigning 1 or 2 people to be project managers relative to that funded, you know, project that you got, or a project that you got funded. I would suggest before you fall into that role, particularly if you don't have somebody that already comes to your organization with that skill set, don't throw somebody in that role without some kind of basic training. And you can get that training, you know, here I have a link to a WikiHow presentation on project management. The junior college has a semester-long course, it's probably online now, on project management. you know, there's different places you can go to get formal training and online training, of course, on project management. There are things to learn about project management if you've never done it before. There's NAT charts, there's critical path methodology, but fundamentally you need to identify the goal and outline how you're going to get there. You're going to need to cost it out, figure out how much each step of the project is going to cost, what resources you're going to need to go to and get, when things are going to happen, use a timeline. You probably want to assign somebody to be what I call the taskmaster, to make sure that things happen when they're supposed to, because if that doesn't happen, then the things downstream from that task are going to run into issues. And you lose a vendor. You know, if you've got something marched out on a timeline and you've got, you know, say a hand crew that's supposed to show up for this block of time on this timeline, and you get behind schedule and go to that hand crew and say, okay, we're ready for you guys to come out and do this hand crew work, they can be like, hey, you're late. You know, we've already booked another job for when you're asking us. So it's real important to have a timeline. And then, of course, at the end of the day, once again, here too, it's really important to keep good records. So,
you know, I just wanted to say, here's an example of when you're trying to get people into your core group. If you've got somebody who is a construction contractor, they've done this over and over and over again. There's somebody that you can say, we need your skills. Can you join us? And just thought I'd throw that in there a little.
Yeah, I think the place I learned to be a project manager, you know, there's team management, team lead, and all that kind of stuff. But the place I really learned to be a project manager was building my own house as an owner builder. You know, that taught me that, you know, hey, if the sheetrock guys aren't done by this date, you know, the spackle guy and painter is not going to be able to get in there when you need them. Same with the plumber and all of the subcontractors. You know, if you, yeah, so that's a good place to start. If you've got somebody on your team that's even been an owner builder or a contractor, like David mentions, you know, they'll have a sense for how to do that. But it does, I wouldn't thrust somebody in there blindly to try to learn as they go, because it's going to be hard. All right, Elizabeth, I'm going to have you kind of weigh in here with some of this stuff. You know, marketing, like you mentioned earlier, you want to get out there and let people know you exist. You want to get out there and share with people the value you have to offer, you know, the community and them as individuals. You know, there are ways to do this. Social media, newspapers, television, radio, direct mail, things like that. So Elizabeth, do you want to kind of jump in and kick this off with your thoughts and ideas?
Yeah, so and some of this is kind of hard right now because COVID, you know, and I have found that COVID can be a noun, a verb, an adjective. It can be a lot of things, just that word COVID. And so it's made it a little bit more difficult. We can't really do these community meetings right now. And so it's harder to gather that information for e-newsletters and mailings and that kind of thing. So working with these emerging fire safe councils, I work with a good deal of them on the east side of the Sierras and down in Southern California. And we're trying to come up with different ways to communicate with folks. So the first thing is, what is news? And right now that's kind of easy to find what that news is. People want to know, okay, Southern California people know what they need to prepare for in case of an earthquake. They know you have to have this much food set aside. You have to do this. You have to do this. Your go bag, your first aid kit, that kind of thing. Right now, California is on fire, and people are worried about evacuating. So that's news. So start communicating with your community on what do you need to do to be prepared just in case. Are you prepared? Are you ready? That's news. So you can draw on news that's happening statewide and make that applicable to your community. So that's one way. What is news? Otherwise, what is news? News is that you're forming this Fire Safe Council. This is why we're forming it. You can do photos of areas that you would like to do some fuels treatment on. You can do drone footage and put that on your website, put that on social media. Look at this, this is dangerous. You know, we've done some here in the community I live in, which is in Central California. I live up in the foothills, and we just did a huge evacuation clearance. So both sides of the road, on the road that I live on, gosh, they were overgrown for 20, 30 years. And Tulare County Fire Crew came through and thought it was going to take them a month, and it took them 4 to go through and do the evacuation fuels clearance. But we did before and after drone footage, and we've been showing folks that, and that's created a lot of excitement and a lot of talk. So there's news that applies to your community specifically, and then you can draw on other news to help your community. We start off, I recommend people start off, well, I did before COVID, with a mailer. You can go through every door direct, and you can do a postcard mailer, and it lets them know who you are, why you are, what you're doing, why it's important, what you're doing. Right now, people are a little bit, I think they're becoming more relaxed, but people are getting a little leery with even just anything coming in the mail, touching anything that came in the mail. I think that's getting a little bit more relaxed now. So that's one option of an introduction. Introduce yourself that way. Follow that up with consistent messaging on a website and on your social media pages. Talk to your local newspaper. If you're like our town, the smaller communities, we have 12-page newspaper. We read cover to cover because we want to read everything. So the small newspapers are really great, but it's a public interest article. Someone's going to be interested in finding out what that is. What is a Fire Safe Council? So call your local newspapers. If you can get someone from a local newspaper or television or radio station to be a volunteer to help you out, that's even better. Or someone who has public relations experience and marketing experience. We found that radio stations really pick up on these kinds of stories. So one of the things that we've started doing, because you can't have community meetings, I mean, everybody knows now we have Zoom meetings everywhere. But we started doing Facebook Live block parties. And they're not huge. Of course, anybody's invited, but what we do is we focus on an area. So we're doing one for Mount Pinos pretty soon. That's up in the Grapevine area. In Los Angeles, towards Los Angeles, between Kern County and Los Angeles County. And they're targeting certain areas of their community, and they're doing a phone tree, and they're calling people, and they're emailing people with this link. Hey, join us on this night on Facebook. We're going to be live, and we're going to talk about evacuation. We're going to talk about defensible space or something like that. And it's a much more relaxed, it's not a presentation kind of thing. People can ask questions in the comments. It's kind of fun. We tell them, you know, grab your favorite frosty drink. Don't even have to change out of your pajamas or yoga pants, and join us while we talk about these issues that are important. Again, social media is free. You know, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, all of those things are important. But word of mouth, and people, you know, people in your community who have influence, talk to them, and they're going to talk to their friends, and they're going to talk to their friends, and you're talking to other people, and they're talking to other people. Word of mouth is huge, and always, always, always driving them back to your website, because that's where your main information is. Did I miss anything, Roberta?
Yeah, I think that's good. I'm going to share 2 experiences I've had recently with Fire Safe Sonoma, and that is I didn't feel like we had a real good media list of contacts in the media. You know, we had a couple of the, you know, the brand names out there, you know, Press Democrat, etc. But getting into the local media was trying to get those connections was a little challenging for us. So I purchased media list for Sonoma County. And now I have like 20 good media contacts who I've just added to our subscription list. And now anytime I do an update for Fire Safe Sonoma, almost every time, I include that media list on that update. So since I've been doing this, you know, our treasurer has gotten a couple, 2, 3 clippings that he's found from local newspapers. Says, hey, I didn't know we were in the paper. And I'm like, I didn't know either, you know. And so they've been picking up these pieces of information that I've been putting out there and doing stories around them, which has been great. You know, I get a phone call. Hey, I learned about you guys. You know, oh, where did you hear about us? Oh, there was an article in a local paper about you guys, and I'm interested in this project you were talking about. I'm like, oh, wow, that's pretty cool. Yeah, we can help you with that. The other thing with regard to what's in the news now is, you know, I'm holed up in a hotel in Ukiah, and I got an email from one of our, you know, subscribers asking a question about, he's like, hey, can you help us out? We're curious to know, you know, once we get to return from evacuating, what are things we need to be worried about? And I'm like, you know, that's a good question. So I turned that into a Fire Safe Sonoma update, and I sent that out to all our folks. You know, I go, hey, here's an update. You know, when you guys repopulate, here's some things to be aware of. And, you know, folks need that. They like it. They appreciate it. And it's different and has value compared to what they're already seeing in the news. You know, so those things are important too. I think that if you can either point people to things that are important to them locally that they're having trouble finding, or take something that's already out there and add value to it, to your local constituency, I think it's huge. And when you do that, I think your audience is just going to grow, and folks will see the value in your local organization.
Yeah, I can relate a story of one of the partners that I used when I first got out of law school. I was working at a Big 8 CPA firm in the tax department, and there was an older partner who he had a huge number of clients. He was what they call a rainmaker in the firm, and his primary method was he'd read the Wall Street Journal, he'd read the paper, and if he saw a newspaper article that was relevant to one of his clients or to someone he had talked to, he would just, back in those days, he had to cut it out, put it in an envelope, and send it. But with a note to saying, thought you'd be interested, let me know if you want to discuss. So people just constantly knew he was thinking of them. And that's kind of what Roberta's saying. If you keep your name out there through newsletters, through letting people know helpful tips, I can personally attest to the fact that one can order from the California Fire Safe Council boxes of 1,100 brochures, and there are 2 brochures. I have probably 1,000 each in each of the boxes in my garage. But anyway, those are great little handouts, and you know, you sort of become known as the source of fire info. I would use the term a lightning rod for that, but that may not be appropriate. People identify you and your organization as the source of information when they want to know if their roof is okay or their defensible space is okay. You hand them a brochure, and then they start coming back to you, and your organization has credibility.
Yeah,
That's absolutely true. We do have those brochures. You can contact me. I put my email address in the Q&A, but I'll do that again. They're free. We ship them to you free. But yes, they do come in boxes of 1,100. So maybe you want to communicate with folks so you can share. One other resource that I thought of as we were talking, Roberta, and I hadn't thought of this one before, and that's strange because I used to work for a Chamber of Commerce. But your local Chamber of Commerce can be a great resource for you. Yeah. Most people think that they only deal with small businesses, but all chambers of commerce, well, they're a nonprofit to begin with, and they love to assist nonprofits, and they have media lists that you can get from them, and it's a minimal fee to join a chamber of commerce, but there's a lot of benefits to it. And so look into that in your community as well.
Oh, that's absolutely brilliant. Yeah, I think I'll look into that for Fire Safe Sonoma. You know, we've engaged with the Chamber of Commerce, but we're not actually like interacting with them regularly. That's brilliant. Brilliant. All right. Okay, so there's a link here to more information on marketing. You know, there's other stuff available, calendar listings. The calendar listings, I think, are kind of popular right now with social media because you can get in there and say, hey, we're doing a webinar on this or that, or, you know, we're doing a Zoom meeting to talk about whatever. You can get calendar listings for a lot of local media, I think, for free. And in news releases, you know, if something comes up, get that out there. And then, of course, social media. So when I worked as the county fire marshal, you know, folks would ask, oh, can you waive that fire permit fee, or can you do this? Or Board of Soups would ask for us to do something that was not funded in my budget. And I would go, you know, I need funding for this. I can't just go over to the copy machine and print this stuff. It's illegal. And then the money doesn't grow on trees. So if you give me the funding to do that, I can do it. But I can't just point resources in a direction and not be able to pay people, you know, to do the thing you're asking them to do. And that's same with a fire safe council. There's things you want to do, and a lot of the things you're going to want to do and need to do cost money. So, you know, there's ways to find money. There's donations. Donations are directly married to your marketing and your face in the community and your reputation into the community. That all needs to be maintained. You can probably sometimes find local big businesses to, you know, help sponsor you. Like David mentioned, you know, they've got a really good relationship with, I think, arborists in a tree cutting outfit in their area that can offer them discounted rates on fuels reduction efforts and stuff. Direct mail, you can ask people whether you're seeking a sponsorship and you have a sponsorship request letter to a business, or sending direct mail postcards to your constituency in your community saying, hey, you know, we're a bootstring organization. We could really appreciate your help. Give us a donation, etc. There's crowdfunding, Kickstarter, you know, GoFundMe, things like that have a lifespan, of course. If you're getting up and going, you know, it wouldn't be unheard of to use GoFundMe and places like that to get your organization started and built. You know, you may want to purchase right away a laptop and a video projector and a screen and software and things like that. Oh, I do want to mention that once you establish, if you establish as a nonprofit, 501c3 in particular, there's a group called TechSoup, TECSOUP. They offer reduced rates for nonprofits. So with Fire Safe Sonoma, we get the Zoom product at about half of what the regular consumer would pay for it. We get discounts on software, things like that as a nonprofit. So be aware of that. There are benefits you get for being a nonprofit that can help you. You know, grants, there are all kinds of grant opportunities out there, almost too many to name. The ones that Fire Safe Sonoma are routinely engaged with are grants through the California Fire Safe Council, the California Fire Foundation, CAL FIRE, the CCI, California Climate Initiative. They fund things through CAL FIRE usually. FEMA, of course, they fund things. And then there's all kinds of off-the-wall stuff. We've been funded oftentimes through Pacific Gas and Electric, our local utility. They help us with a lot of projects. There's stuff out there. And then there's really obscure grants that every once in a while I hear about. I can't think of any now, but every once in a while you hear somebody, you got a grant from who? Wow, I never heard of them. So they're out there. Just keep your antenna up, and you know, when you hear about them, write them down. Elizabeth, can you think of any that you're aware of that the folks should be aware of?
We have several funding opportunities coming up. One that I'm thinking of specifically is not quite yet ready to launch, but will be, and that is through PG&E. So I know that PG&E just granted a lot of organizations, just awarded a lot of grants to organizations. But they've also given us at the California Fire Safe Council a grant to disperse to help establish fire safe councils. That's one of the deliverables that we are charged with. And so that's why I wanted to make sure you knew it's not a lot of money. It's like $5,000, but it can help you with getting a website together and maybe a first mailer or maybe some signage, that kind of thing. It's specifically for startup costs. So that's going to be launching very, very soon. And I think that's something you all would be interested in. One of the programs we have with the Fire Safe Council is the regional coordinators. And so you will have a coordinator in your region, a specific representative from the California Fire Safe Council, who will be there to help you establish your Fire Safe Council. I'm working that way right now and in this area right now because I'm the only regional coordinator hired at this point in time. But I think that Sonoma County, you'll be transitioning to another regional coordinator. Not positive what those boundaries are going to be yet, but that person is there to specifically help you with these kinds of things, with starting a Fire Safe Council, with technical services. You know, what do you need training in? What do you need help in? Can we connect you with Dave Duncan over here to help mentor you when he has time? Or can we connect you with Roberta and Fire Safe Sonoma and set up a mentoring opportunity? Maybe starting a Fire Safe Council isn't what you necessarily need. You need to join in with a Fire Safe Council and a neighboring community, and they just need to expand. We're here to help you with all of those things. How do you write grants? How do you do grant reporting? So that is another program that's launching. You will have a new regional coordinator by the end of September, which is super exciting. County coordinators, there will be some county coordinators hired through CCI funds. Each county will have a coordinator that is specifically charged with helping with capacity building with Fire Safe Councils, either establishing a Fire Safe Council or helping to strengthen those that are existing. So there's this whole tiered opportunity going on. As for funding, we have utilities funding. We have some CAL FIRE funding coming up that's coming through us, in addition to their own grant projects. We just closed our Forest Service funding for this year, but that'll open up again in April. We also work with some insurance companies, so State Farm, Farmers. So there's other opportunities. If you go to our website, we post our opportunities regularly. We keep that updated. You can also go to our website, California Fire Safe, CAFireSafeCouncil.org. And if you scroll to the bottom of the home screen, there's a little place where you can sign up for our newsletter. And you just put your email address and then in there, and then you'll be in our newsletter. And we always send out our funding opportunities that way.
Elizabeth, on your website, you guys have a listing of local fire safe councils. And I know in Sonoma County, not all of our fire safe councils are on your list. And, you know, I think it's just a matter of them not getting around to connecting with you. But how important is it for folks to be, you know, on your guys's list, for lack of a better term, or listing? And, you know, how can a local fire safe council leverage the fact that they're on there, other than, you know, being recognized statewide? If somebody down in Southern Cal wants to know about the fire safe councils up here, I think it's important that they be able to do that and go, oh, wow, in Sonoma County, they have this many. You know, right now they probably only see half a dozen, when in reality there's more than that. And I think it's important that they know that there's more than that up here. Can you speak to that a little bit?
It's hard for us to know how many community fire safe councils there are because we haven't connected with all of them yet. Yeah. I mean, we right now, I think we have 150 something listed on our website. But it's funders will look to see if you are associated with the California Fire Safe Council, and how do they do that? They go to our website and they check that listing. So that's a huge benefit right there. it gives you what Dave was talking about earlier. It gives you cred to know that you're associated with a state organization. And it drives people from our site. So eventually we're going to have landing pages on our website for fire safe councils across the state. And so when they go through our directory, they're going to see, oh, I have a fire safe council in my community. I'm going to click on that. It's going to take them to your landing page on our site, which will give them basic information and drive them to your website. If you don't have a website, this can serve as a web page for you. You can post links. You will have complete control of this web page. You can post links. You can post articles there as well. So we get probably, it's pretty crazy some of the questions we get. People contact us when they see you listed on our website and they want to know more about you. We'll drive them towards you. But we get some folks who ask us, why can't this fire safe council come out and trim my trees? Why can't they just do that? You know, and so there's a lot of random things that come in all the time. So people are always asking about these fire safe councils on our website. There's a lot of attention that people pay, especially when during times like this, when it's fire season, you know, the peak of fire season, they're looking for help within their communities. And when you type in fire safe council, the California Fire Safe Council comes up there pretty close to the top. And so they go there and then they can find your information on our site. So we kind of, a lot of traffic gets driven to you through our website, I guess is what I'm trying to say. We get the random questions, we get the how do we contact these people? Do I have a fire safe council in my community? That kind of thing. But knowing that you're associated with a state organization and being able to drive some traffic towards you and connect you with your community are two huge benefits of being listed on our website. And I can type in, I'll give you the email address of the person that can take care of that for you at our organization.
Perfect. Yeah, if you can put that in the chat, that'd be great. Okay. And then also in terms of grants, I get frustrated sometimes when I work with folks and a grant opportunity pops up. And then all of a sudden you get folks saying, oh, here's this grant, we should do this, we should do that. And then you work like mad to basically create a business plan. That's what a grant application is. You come up with a business plan specific to a project that, you know, you probably just pulled out of the air just now, just because of that grant. I think that's silly. I think that as an organization, of course, one of the first things you should be doing is developing your first community wildfire protection plan. That seems like the most likely first step for a fire safe council once you've formed. And part of the reason I say that is because that community wildfire protection plan could serve as your strategic plan in the absence of a formal strategic plan. And within the body of that CWPP, you identify, first you do a risk assessment of your footprint, your community, and then based on that risk assessment, you identify areas that need help. And then using that information of areas that need help, you come up with conceptual projects that could address those risks that you have identified. And so once you've done that, at least, then you can start coming up with projects based on what you need to do to mitigate the risks you've identified. Once you've got those projects crafted or those business plans developed, then you've essentially done the work of your grant writing. So now the step-by-step is, okay, you've identified the risks, you've come up with projects to mitigate those risks. Now all you need to do is sit around and wait for a grant opportunity to fund that project that you've already developed. So when your grant opportunity presents itself, you go, oh yeah, we have these projects in our community that need to get done. Now we have this funding opportunity to fund them. Boom, connect the dots, you're there. So you're not having to look at the grant and go, gosh, this is a good opportunity. What should we do? I don't know, what should we do? well, we wanted to do this, we wanted to do that. No, 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 no. You don't have to do it that way. When the grant opportunity comes around the corner, you go, awesome, we finally got this opportunity. Let's put this project in, apply for the funding for it, and then you're off to the races. I think that's the best way to do that. So that's what I'm talking about when I say have shovel-ready projects ahead of the opportunities. The other thing that's important, especially if you're just starting out, don't apply for a $2 million grant, you know, for fuels reduction or whatever right off the bat. Start small. Start with something like, you know, $8,000 for education and outreach, you know, $5,000 to do a bunch of home assessments, you know, $10,000 to come up with a addressing, you know, project within your community. Things like that. It's a good place to start small and then build your credibility and grow your ability and your team skill sets to be able to take on larger projects as you go. You know, go ahead, David, because I know you have some experience here too and some.
Well, yeah, we were early on. We had a meeting where I said, I want everybody in the room to write down projects that are important to you. This was our board I'm talking about. And so everybody wrote them down. And they were these grand projects, like clear the eucalyptus trees along this 100-yard stretch of road. And things that are going to cost a lot of money. And so I said, let's think about this. If you were giving out grant money and I come to you and say, I want a $500,000 grant to do this project, wouldn't one of your questions be, have you ever done anything like this before? And if I say, oh, well, no, not really. I mean, how likely are you to give me $10, let alone $500,000? So that's where we're starting out. And our next meeting, we're going to start talking about what projects we want to take on with our shiny new CWPP. And one of them will be, as Roberta mentioned, a simple project. The reflective address signs for every home in our council area with the 4-inch high letters, with the contrasting background with the reflective letters. It is a county ordinance that says we need to have these, and it has the practical effect that not just fire personnel, but sheriffs, ambulance, they all need to be able to find your address when there's an emergency at your home. So this is something I'm hoping we in Grove Street can do pretty quickly. And I've even done a little research, and I had pulled a number out of my head of $10,000. I think we could pull this off in our council area for 10 grand. So showing that we've managed $10,000 is a lot more convincing when we go for the 50,000 and so on. And again, get back to what do I mean by manage it? We have accounted for every dollar in, every dollar out. We did it according, if there's a deadline, we did it on or before the deadline, and we can provide the reports that the granting agency wants to see that we have handled their money responsibly and achieved the goal that they paid for. And you take lots of pictures before and after and everything. And so that's what I would say about starting small. Just find some local project that you can do that'll help your visibility, achieve a goal, and show that you can handle money.
Yeah, Elizabeth, you were a grant manager for the Fire Safe Council, I think before you got into your current role. Can you speak to that a little bit and share, you know, the importance of that a little bit?
Yeah, I can guarantee that most any grant application you fill out is going to ask you about past grant management and project management experience. And when we, at the California Fire State Council, we put out our call for applications, and those come in and we do an initial screening. And that's, I'm not going to say it's a red flag, but it is a concern if we have an organization that has not, that is applying for a $200,000 grant, but has never managed a project before. So being able to build up that credibility on your end is important. And we also find that and we do grant to organizations that have not managed a grant before. Don't get me wrong, but it can be a little concerning. And so there's a little bit more research done after the grant award is announced. We do a risk assessment, and it's a pretty thorough interview and documents you have to provide to us, and you can still not be given the sub-award agreement and the funding if you don't pass the risk assessment. So it's a pretty big deal. Because it's federal funds, we probably go a step further than what the CAL FIRE funds do, but they also have a section that asks you about previous grant and project management experience. There have been organizations that, as grant managers, that we've really had to help through the process. We're happy to do that if that willingness is there to, hey, we've never done this before, we got awarded this grant, help us with this. But it's a struggle if you haven't had that experience and you bite off more than you can chew right from the front, right from, you might think, well, it's easy. I'm going to ask for $100,000. We're going to provide $100,000 match with our volunteer time and some donations from the community. We're going to contract with a goat herder, and we're going to have them, bring their goats out, and they're just going to take care of that hillside, and that's all there is to do. But there's so much more on the grant reporting side, and there's a lot more logistically to that project than you might be thinking of. So getting your feet wet a little bit we always recommend an educational project first.
Yeah.
Work on education first. And then maybe the next step is a defensible space project. Maybe you're going to help your community, low income, elderly, disabled folks with their defensible space clearance. And that's the next step up, and that's a little bit more money, and you're going to do some house evaluations of homeowners, home hardening and that kind of thing. Build up a little bit. Everybody's eager to jump right in and do the big project, and it's great visibility, but you can create some really good visibility out of the smaller projects as well. So it's an experience.
You'd rather have the good reputation that you get from starting small. You mess up one big project and you're done, I would think. I mean, people are just never going to trust you, and it can be really hard to get any grants. So
yeah,
it's tough because we know, everybody knows, so not that you won't get another grant, but it's going to be a little bit harder. So you need to give yourself some credibility first, and it's just be kinder to yourself. Really, truly find out what the capacity is of your board and your own time, because as it says right here on this slide, it's a lot of work. And if you're doing what David's doing, what Roberta's doing, what I'm doing, we're all working, plus we're probably all, well, I know we're all volunteering in our community on a fire safe council and helping to make our community safer. So it's a lot of work. So make sure that you yourselves have the capacity to handle it as well, and don't overwhelm yourselves. Because you could get funding for a great big project and become so overwhelmed that you just simply walk away, you've burned out, and you don't ever want to do it again. Yeah. And then you've defeated the whole.
One kind of side benefit of the CWPP process, as one of our board members said partway through, she sent me an email that said, this is a full-time job. Well, it's not, but it gets people attuned to the fact that this isn't some little book club that you join and you get together once a month, maybe possibly, and it's an option to show up or not show up. It is, as it says on the slide, it's a lot of work, but that's where getting team efforts, getting the work done by groups of people, no one person does it all, and you don't get the burnout. But and keeping the ultimate goal in mind is really important, that you're going to make the world safer for your community if you can get a project done.
Yeah, definitely. All right, and then another funding opportunity, of course, is fundraisers. I don't want to spend a lot of time here, and we are running out of time. We're meant to be 2 hours, so we have about 10 minutes left, and I want to leave some time for questions. I don't see any in the queue right now, but if you guys have questions, the folks that are still here, go ahead and feel free to toss them out there. But they're, fundraisers are a little challenging right now. But they're, if you think outside the box, there are things you can do. I recently went online to look at some innovative ideas for fundraisers while we're sheltering in place. You know, somebody suggested a game show you could do, maybe find a local celebrity to come on and do something there. Do an online raffle, virtual comedy night with a celebrity. I'm considering doing a film festival sort of a thing and basically put it out there, do a film making contest. And I've been involved with these before from the producer end of it, for a contestant, where you have an entity, they say, hey, you know, we're gonna have a film contest, see who can come up with the best advertisement for our thing. So you could say, okay, we need somebody to do a PSA for Fire Safe Sonoma, and we're gonna pay somebody, you know, $1,000 for the winner. And so you have, you know, young, and not just young, but filmmakers in general out there who like to do that thing. They compete to make a PSA for your organization, and then you have your board or whoever, you know, be the judge. And it's like, okay, we like this one the best. So you win the film festival contest, and you know, we're giving you $1,000 for a product that would otherwise cost you several thousands of dollars if you had it made professionally. So that's an idea I'm toying with right now. But you know, these days we have to think outside the box, because we can't have our typical, you know, silent auction or live auction or your dinner, or raffle in person, etc. Memberships are another way to find funding, but you know, I don't want to go into the weeds a lot with memberships, but they have their own sets of pros and cons. The biggest snag, for lack of a better term, I see with memberships is they can impact your ability to have a quorum. And you do have, oftentimes memberships have voting rights, etc., whenever you make a decision as a board.
Yeah, Roberta, we debated about, not for long, but the notion of having members never really was taken seriously in our case. A couple of things, as you said, you're making technical decisions based on fire science, fuel types, structures, governmental concerns, permits. The last thing you want to have to do is go to a bunch of uninformed members and get a vote for something that you need to get done, and that they don't understand it, the technical side. So, you know, to some extent, we're helping them. Last thing we want to do is get the members. The other is, and it just occurred to me, if you say join up as a member of the Fire Safe Council, and let's say half the neighborhood does, or a quarter of the neighborhood does, and those other 3/4 don't. When it comes to doing work, you don't want the implication that you did work at the members' end of the community and in the council area, and not in the people who weren't members. I mean, the neighborhood politics are tough enough, let alone have something like that floating around. So I don't think you want to have members. Just have your board, and your board figures out what needs to be done. And when you start clearing trees and clearing the county right away, people will be happy.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, so that's wrapping it up. I do want to remind everybody once again that these are resources that are available on the PDF version. If you get the PDF version, just click on any of those links and you can get to those resources. And I think Nolo Press is, yeah. You know, there's this book, Nonprofit Kit for Dummies, it's available. Also Nolo Press, like David mentioned, as I think they actually have a 3 or 4 volume set of books specific for nonprofits, how to start one incorporated, how to do fundraising, how to do newsletters. And the other one David mentioned is just keeping up with your regular business practices. Good set of books. You know, maybe if you apply for that startup funding from the California Council, you know, you can buy some of these books to get you off the ground and running. So that's all I have. David, Elizabeth, do you want to add anything? I'm opening it up for questions now for any of the panelists or any of the attendees who want to throw a question into the Q&A. Please do so. You know, we'll answer your questions. And David or Elizabeth, do you guys have anything to add while we wait for some questions to come in?
Well, the only thing I'll say is, oh, go ahead, Elizabeth.
Go ahead, David. I just, I put my contact information in the chat, and I also put our website, and I put Delana, she's my coworker. She handles adding organizations to our website database list. So I put all that information in the chat for you. Please don't hesitate to reach out to me. And I'm here to assist however I can.
Okay.
I'm going to put mine in here too, if I can remind. We just got Grove Street Fire Safe Council emails up, so.
Oh, cool.
If I can remember it. The one thing I was going to add is that we've been talking about how much work it is and incorporating and tax law and accounting principles. And, you know, there's a fun way to spend an afternoon. But, you know, it's one of these things that all will be revealed. You don't have to swallow the whale all at once. Just start working on it. And then as these issues become relevant, you deal with them and you can keep moving forward. And one thing I've been telling our board is to look back a year ago and look how far we have come. A year ago, we had 2 or 3 meetings, maybe, yeah, two meetings. And we were still kind of dealing with this amorphous blob of what it is we were trying to do. And now here we are with a completed CWPP and we're ready to go to market with it. So, you know, it sounds overwhelming, but you keep working at it, and all of a sudden you wake up one day and boom, you're a fire safe council.
Yeah, so.
And the work that you're doing is important. The work that you're doing is super important, and the work that you're doing is gratifying. You know, it's hard and you're logging through, but when you get your first project done or you're organized and you get that certificate that says you're an official 501c3, it's pretty exciting, and you kind of want to shout it out to everybody. Yeah. So it's not just all work and no gratification from that. It's really rewarding.
Yeah, and on the 501c3, you'll hear about, oh, the IRS takes months and months and months to wait for the C3 status. We were expecting to wait 9 months, but what is it, like 8 weeks, 6 weeks?
Yeah.
All of a sudden, boom, there comes a determination letter. I was very happy.
Yeah. But that was the same for Three Rivers, for my community. We were expecting to wait a long time, and we had it very quickly. So. They
have a new online application. In fact, you cannot send the paper form in unless you like live in somewhere where there's no water running or something. But I think maybe the online application is speeding things up. So when you get to that point, you do the online and it goes pretty fast.
Yeah. All right. Great. Thank you so much, Elizabeth. Thank you. Special thanks to you, David, because I know with your accounting business, tax time, you know, this is a big chunk of time out of your calendar. So I do appreciate you taking the time this afternoon to help with this.
I'm happy to do it, and it's a whole lot more fun to talk about than taxes.
Yeah. All right. Back to work. All right. Great. Thank you, guys. Thank you, Elizabeth, for all the work you do at the California Fire Safe Council. You guys are phenomenal, and I